Vision is the most underrated resource a person can possess, and yet it is the most decisive factor in determining the trajectory of a life, a business, or even an entire civilization. Because vision is not about predicting the future, but about insisting on a future that does not yet exist, and having the audacity to build toward it despite all the noise around you. Most people are prisoners of the present. They spend their time adjusting to what is, instead of imagining what could be. They play by rules written decades ago. They settle for incremental gains, and they call it progress. But the real breakthroughs come from those who decide that the present is nothing more than raw material for constructing the future. Think of Tesla. Before 2008, the consensus was that electric cars were toys for hobbyists, slow, unattractive, and destined to remain niche, but the vision was different. Build an electric car so compelling that people would want it not because it is electric, but because it is the best car. That single shift in vision redefined an entire industry and forced the most powerful automakers in the world to rethink their future. Or look at SpaceX. The idea of reusable rockets was ridiculed for decades. NASA tried and gave up. Experts said it was impossible. But the vision was clear. If humanity is ever to become a multiplanetary species, the cost of space travel must fall dramatically, and the only way to do that is reusability. That vision guided thousands of decisions, late nights, failures, and iterations, until the impossible became routine. Vision does not guarantee success, but without it, success is impossible, because effort without direction is just motion, and motion without a destination leads nowhere. If you examine the lives of people who stagnate, you will find a common pattern. They repeat each year like it is a photocopy of the last one, same job, same frustrations, same excuses. Why? Because they never took the time to paint a picture of the future they wanted, so the years passed them by, designed by someone else's system. The most dangerous thing is not failure. It is drifting without vision, mistaking activity for achievement. A person with vision can endure 10 years of struggle, ridicule, and setbacks because they are fueled not by comfort but by clarity. They know where they are going, and that makes the obstacles along the way tolerable, even useful. Imagine two people laying bricks. One is told to just keep stacking them until he is tired. The other is told he is building a cathedral. Same labor, different vision. One ends the day exhausted and empty. The other ends it exhausted but inspired. Vision turns labor into purpose. Without vision, sacrifice feels like loss. With vision, sacrifice feels like investment. This is why I keep saying that people underestimate what they can accomplish in 10 years but overestimate what they can do in a week. They crave intensity, the quick result, the dramatic leap, the sudden transformation, but intensity fades, and when it fades, so does motivation. Vision is different. Vision is like a compass in the wilderness. It doesn't remove the hills or the storms, but it points you in the right direction so that every step, no matter how small, is progress. Think about it. 10 years will pass whether you plan for them or not. 10 years from now, you will arrive somewhere. The only question is whether you arrive there by accident or by design. The people who design their decade with vision become unrecognizable compared to who they were before. They are sharper, stronger, more resilient, and more accomplished, not because of luck, but because their vision pulled them forward day after day. When you live without vision, every obstacle feels like the whole story. A flat tire ruins your week, a bad conversation ruins your month, and a setback ruins your year because you have no greater context. With vision, obstacles shrink. They become chapters, not the entire book. This is why visionaries endure ridicule and resistance better than others. They see beyond the immediate. When you tell someone your vision and they laugh, that is often a sign you are onto something worth pursuing. If no one laughs, maybe you are not thinking big enough. Vision should be slightly terrifying, because if it doesn't scare you, it is not really pulling you out of your comfort zone. When I think about the future, I don't just ask what is profitable. I ask what is necessary for humanity to thrive. If we are to survive long term, we need sustainable energy, hence Tesla and Solar City. If we are to survive as a species beyond Earth, we need interplanetary travel, hence SpaceX. These were not random business ideas, they were visions that pointed toward a future worth building. And once that vision is clear, it creates a gravitational pull. It attracts talent, it attracts resources, and it attracts persistence in yourself, because you know you are not working for a paycheck, you are working for a purpose. Too many people dismiss vision as daydreaming, but the truth is vision is architecture, it is the blueprint. No one builds a skyscraper by stacking steel at random, they follow a design. Life is no different. If you don't have a vision, you are laying bricks without a plan. You will wake up one day surrounded by a pile of bricks and wonder why it doesn't look like anything meaningful. But with vision, the same bricks form walls, rooms, towers, a masterpiece. The challenge is that vision requires patience, and patience is in short supply in a world addicted to speed. People want quarterly gains, viral fame, instant gratification, but the real game is long term. The most transformative things require decades. Building a company, raising children, writing timeless work, or engineering the future of humanity. Vision is the seed, and time is the soil, and together they produce harvests that astonish everyone who thought it couldn't be done. If you adopt this mindset, you stop asking, how fast can I get it, and start asking, how far can I go if I don't quit? And that shift alone can change everything. So here's the challenge. What is your cathedral? What is the picture of the future that you are willing to endure ridicule, setbacks, and 10 years of struggle to create? Don't settle for survival. Don't settle for comfort. Comfort zones are where dreams go to die. The only way to live a life that matters is to decide on a vision that pulls you forward so powerfully that the daily grind feels like part of the mission. Vision is not about predicting, it is about creating. It is about standing in the present and declaring that the future will look different because you chose to make it so. The world does not need more people playing safe. It needs more people who are willing to hold a vision steady for long enough that it bends reality in their direction. And if you think 10 years is too long, remember this. 10 years ago feels like yesterday. 10 years from now will feel the same. The years will pass anyway. The only real choice you have is whether you will drift or design. The greatest illusion most people live under is that playing it safe protects them from risk, when in reality playing it safe is the biggest risk of all. Because safety is often just a disguise for stagnation, and stagnation is the surest path to irrelevance. And if you look closely at history, every breakthrough, every major advance, every leap forward for humanity came from someone who was willing to embrace risk, while the rest of the world clung to comfort. Think about it. The airplane was built by two bicycle mechanics who risked their reputation and their livelihood to chase a dream that most scientists at the time called absurd. The internet was championed by researchers and entrepreneurs who risked years of effort building something no one had a clear business model for, and yet now both have reshaped the entire world. Playing safe, on the other hand, creates the illusion of progress while quietly stealing your future, because the world is moving whether you are or not, and if you stand still, you fall behind. This is why I always say that risk is not optional. It is embedded in life. You can risk failing by trying something new, or you can risk irrelevance by sticking to the old, but you cannot avoid risk. The only real choice is what type of risk you want to live with. When I started SpaceX, the probability of success was extremely low. People told me rockets were only for governments, that no private company could ever break into that arena, and if I had been focused on playing safe, I would have agreed with them, kept my money in software, and avoided the ridicule. But then what? Humanity would have been left without a serious effort toward becoming a multiplanetary species. To me, that was a bigger risk than failure. Losing money was one risk, but leaving humanity vulnerable to a single planet catastrophe was a risk I was unwilling to take. That's the difference between those who change the world and those who watch from the sidelines. They understand that risk is not something to run from, it is something to manage, to embrace, and to channel toward outcomes that matter. Playing safe feels rational in the short term, but it is almost always destructive in the long term. Look at companies that once dominated their industries, Blockbuster, Kodak, Nokia. They played it safe. They refused to risk cannibalizing their own models, and because of that, they became obsolete. Contrast that with companies willing to disrupt themselves before someone else did, like Apple shifting from iPods to iPhones or Netflix moving from DVDs to streaming. And you see the truth. The real danger is not in risking too much. It is in risking too little. People often ask me how I handle fear, and the answer is simple. Fear is natural, but the question is, what is the scale of the fear you allow to govern your life? Fear of embarrassment, fear of losing money, fear of failure, these are small fears. Fear of stagnation, fear of wasting your potential, fear of leaving humanity worse off than you found it, these are big fears. If you anchor yourself to big fears, the small ones lose their power. When you reframe risk not as something to be avoided, but as the necessary price of progress, everything changes. You stop asking, what if I fail? And start asking, what if I never try? You stop worrying about what people will say if it doesn't work, and start worrying about what your life will look like if you never had the courage to test your limits. And the truth is, People already overestimate the downside of risk and underestimate the upside. In most modern societies, failing doesn't mean you starve. It doesn't mean you're exiled. It means you learn, you pivot, you try again. Yet people behave as if failure is a death sentence. They cling to jobs they hate, routines that drain them, and ideas they don't believe in because they think that's safer than risking failure. But in reality, they are slowly failing by default. Every year they delay action. Every year they choose the familiar over the uncertain. They dig themselves deeper into a life they don't want. Safety becomes the cage that keeps them from living. Real freedom begins when you understand that risk is not the enemy. Stagnation is. If you are not growing, you are decaying. If you are not innovating, you are becoming obsolete. If you are not challenging yourself, you are shrinking. And the only antidote to that is to lean into risk deliberately, strategically, with eyes open. Risk doesn't mean recklessness. It doesn't mean jumping blind. It means calculating probabilities, preparing contingencies, and then still moving forward when others would freeze. It means asking, what is the worst that can happen, and can I survive it? And if the answer is yes, then not taking the leap is the real insanity. Most people live their lives as if they can avoid risk by avoiding action. But the truth is, inaction is the most dangerous action of all. If you stay in the same job for 10 years without growing, that is a massive risk. If you refuse to invest in yourself because you're afraid of wasting money, that is a massive risk. If you avoid tough conversations in relationships because you fear discomfort, that is a massive risk. The consequences may not hit immediately, but they compound over time until one day you wake up realizing you've lost years to the illusion of safety. So the question you must ask is not, how do I avoid risk? But, what risks am I choosing? Are you choosing the risk of growth, experimentation, and potential failure? Or are you choosing the risk of decline, regret, and wasted potential? One builds a future, the other robs it. This is why entrepreneurs, inventors, and visionaries seem different. It's not that they are fearless, it's that they are unwilling to let fear of small losses prevent them from chasing big wins. They know that history doesn't remember the people who played it safe. It remembers the ones who pushed boundaries. Nobody writes books about the executives who maintained status quo. They write books about the explorers who sailed into uncharted waters. They write about the scientists who tested radical theories. They write about the builders who dared to construct something no one believed possible. Playing safe is a strategy for mediocrity. Taking risks is the only strategy for significance. And once you internalize that, you stop looking at risk as a threat and start seeing it as an ally. Every major innovation in my life has been born out of risk. Investing my last resources into SpaceX when we were on the edge of bankruptcy, doubling down on Tesla when experts predicted it would collapse, betting on solar when most said it was uneconomical. None of those were safe decisions, but safety would have left the world worse off. Risk is where meaning lives. Playing safe is where dreams die. So I challenge you, look at your own life. Where are you clinging to safety as a disguise for fear? Where are you choosing comfort over growth? And what would happen if you flipped the equation, if you chose to embrace risk as the path to a life that actually matters? Because here's the truth. 10 years from now, you will look back and the only regrets you will carry are not the risks you took that failed, but the risks you never took at all. Fear is the invisible chain that holds more people back than any external obstacle ever could. And failure is the proof they fear most. Yet ironically, the very thing they must embrace to move forward. And together, fear and failure create a cycle that traps millions in mediocrity. But the truth is, once you see the cycle for what it is, you can break it, you can rewire it, and you can transform fear from a jailer into a compass, and failure from a verdict into fuel. Think about how fear works. It magnifies the possibility of pain, it whispers worst-case scenarios, it paralyzes you before you even begin. But here's the reality: fear feeds on inaction. It grows stronger the longer you wait, and it only shrinks when you face it head-on. If you've ever been afraid of jumping into a pool of cold water, you know the feeling. Standing at the edge, you imagine how freezing it will be. You hesitate, your mind invents stories of discomfort, and your body tenses. But the moment you leap, the shock lasts seconds and then you adapt. That is how fear operates in life. It is always bigger in your mind than in reality, and the longer you delay, the stronger it gets, until one day you're frozen at the edge of your own potential. Failure then becomes the monster you avoid at all costs, but the problem is that avoidance becomes the very guarantee of the failure you fear. People are so terrified of failing that they don't even attempt, and by not attempting, they secure the exact outcome they were running from. This is the cycle. Fear of failure leads to inaction. Inaction produces stagnation, stagnation leads to regret, regret fuels more fear, and the cycle tightens like a noose. Breaking that cycle requires a radical shift in perspective, because fear and failure are not enemies, they are guides. Fear shows you where growth lives. Failure shows you where improvement hides. Every breakthrough in human history required someone willing to walk directly into both. When I started SpaceX, failure was practically guaranteed. We failed 3 launches in a row. Each one cost millions. Each one was public. Each one invited ridicule. The fear of being remembered as the fool who wasted his fortune on impossible rockets was real. But had we given in to that fear, had we let failure become the final word, there would be no reusable rockets today, no path toward Mars, no demonstration that private spaceflight could exist. Instead, each failure became a data point, a lesson, a refinement, and it was precisely because of those failures that the 4th launch succeeded and changed the trajectory of the entire company. That's the paradox. Failure hurts in the moment, but in hindsight, it always reveals itself as the essential ingredient for success. The people who live in fear don't see this because they never give themselves the chance to connect the dots. They see failure as evidence they're not good enough. But failure isn't about who you are, it's about what you tried. And what you tried is proof that you had the courage to move. Fear tries to tell you that failure means stop, but in reality, failure means adjust. This is why those who achieve extraordinary things often look fearless, but they are not fearless, they simply have a different relationship with fear. They don't wait for fear to disappear before acting. They act despite fear, and in doing so, they weaken its hold. Breaking the cycle starts with reframing failure, not as an endpoint, but as feedback. When you stop asking, "What if I fail?" and instead ask, "What will I learn if I fail?" you strip fear of its power. Failure ceases to be a wall and becomes a stepping stone. Every successful person you admire has left behind a trail of failures. Edison built thousands of useless prototypes before the light bulb. Jobs was fired from his own company before returning to transform it. Bezos watched billions vanish in experiments that didn't pan out. These were not detours from the path of success, they were the path. And the only reason we remember their names is because they kept walking forward instead of letting the cycle of fear and failure shut them down. Fear will always be present. You cannot eradicate it, but you can train it. Just like a muscle, exposure reshapes your capacity. Each time you face fear and take action anyway, you send a signal to yourself, "I can survive this." Each time you fail and rise again, you send another signal, "Failure doesn't define me." And slowly, those signals accumulate until fear no longer controls your decisions. This is how resilience is built, not through theory, but through repeated exposure. It's like forging steel. You heat it, you hammer it, you cool it, and with each cycle it becomes stronger, more unbreakable. Humans are the same. Fear and failure are the furnace and the hammer. Avoid them and you remain brittle. Embrace them and you become forged, but you cannot wait for confidence before you act. Confidence is not the prerequisite of action, it is the result of it. People wait endlessly saying, "Once I feel ready, I'll try." But readiness never comes. You don't become less afraid by waiting. You become less afraid by moving. You become confident by collecting experiences, by stacking small acts of courage until fear has no choice but to shrink. So break the cycle by moving when it's uncomfortable, by speaking when your voice trembles, by starting when you don't have all the answers. Failure is not the opposite of success, it is the process of success. Every rocket failure at SpaceX, every production nightmare at Tesla, every early ridicule at Neuralink, these weren't reasons to quit. They were necessary steps that made the breakthroughs possible. When you internalize that, fear loses its grip, failure becomes fuel, and the cycle collapses. You no longer see fear as a stop sign. You see it as a signal. This is where you should go. You no longer see failure as a verdict. You see it as an upgrade. And once you do that, you stop living in hesitation and you start living in momentum. That is the point where transformation begins. Vision is the compass that keeps you moving forward when everything else is chaotic. And in a world that constantly shifts, throws obstacles, and tests your patience, vision is the one thing that separates those who drift endlessly from those who actually build something extraordinary. Because without vision, you can work endlessly, pour in all your effort, and still end up nowhere, like rowing furiously without knowing where the shore is. But with vision, even small steps accumulate into something monumental, because they are aligned, they are consistent, and they are building toward a picture that exists clearly in your mind long before it becomes visible to anyone else. Most people underestimate the power of vision. They think it's just a vague dream or a motivational phrase you pin on your wall. But vision is much more than that. It is the architecture of your future, the invisible blueprint you're working from every single day, whether you realize it or not. And if you don't design your vision consciously, then you'll default to someone else's, which is why so many people spend decades building someone else's dream without ever questioning what they truly wanted to build themselves. The truth is, chaos is inevitable. Markets crash, technology shifts, people betray, plans fail, environments change. If your direction depends only on current conditions, you will be tossed around like a small boat in a storm. But if your direction depends on a vision you've committed to, you have an anchor that keeps you pointed forward even when the waves are violent. Think about rockets. When we launch a rocket, it doesn't fly in a perfect straight line. It constantly adjusts, facing wind, gravity, shifting air currents, but it always knows where it's going because the destination has been programmed into the system, and every correction, no matter how small, is made in relation to that target. That's exactly how vision works in life. Without vision, every distraction feels like an opportunity, every problem feels like a crisis, every failure feels like the end. But with vision, distractions are simply noise outside your course, problems are adjustments along the way, failures are temporary turbulence. Vision gives you context, and context is what turns suffering into endurance and chaos into clarity. The danger is not that people have no ability. The danger is they have no vision, and so their ability is wasted chasing random things that never add up to anything significant. One year they pursue money, the next year they chase status, the next they retreat into comfort, and at the end of 10 years they realize they've been busy but not productive, active but not progressing. Vision prevents this drift. Vision is not about predicting the future perfectly, it's about deciding what future you are willing to commit to building and holding on to that decision long enough for reality to bend toward it. Most people give up because they expect results too soon. But if your vision is clear, you understand that results are not immediate, they are cumulative, and you keep stacking days, stacking effort, stacking failures turned into lessons, until eventually what was once only in your mind becomes undeniable in the physical world. Vision also does something else. It attracts the right people. Humans are wired to follow clarity. When you articulate a vision and you live it consistently, people feel it. They see it in your behavior, in your decisions, in your resilience, and the right ones begin to align with you, to join your mission, to support your path. Without vision, you don't inspire trust, because no one wants to follow someone drifting. With vision, even if you're small, even if you're starting, you project stability, you project direction, and that is magnetic. This is why leaders are not the ones with the loudest voices, but the ones with the clearest vision. They don't need to scream because clarity resonates louder than volume. Vision is also deeply personal. It's not enough to copy someone else's dream. You can borrow strategies, but you cannot borrow vision, because vision is the intersection of who you are, what you value, and what future you believe is worth fighting for. If you try to chase someone else's, you'll burn out, because the challenges will feel heavier than your motivation. But when the vision is truly yours, the obstacles feel like proof of your path, because you understand what you're building matters to you beyond approval, beyond applause, beyond money. That's when vision becomes unstoppable. And here's another truth. Vision doesn't remove fear, it gives fear a smaller voice. When you know where you're going, fear of temporary setbacks doesn't paralyze you because you measure them against the bigger picture. Fear whispers, what if you fail? Vision answers, so what, the direction is still worth it. Fear asks, what if people laugh? Vision responds, then let them, they're not building this with me. Fear tries to narrow your focus on short-term discomfort. Vision expands it into long-term purpose, and purpose always outlasts fear. In times of chaos, vision also protects you from impatience. We live in a culture addicted to immediacy, instant results, instant gratification, but true transformation takes years, often decades, and without vision you will quit during the delay, you will assume it's not working, you will abandon the process, but with vision you expect the delay, you see it as part of the architecture, you keep building brick by brick, even when the wall doesn't look like much yet, because you know what the blueprint says, and you trust the process long enough for it to show. Imagine two people planting seeds. One digs up the soil every week to check if anything has sprouted, impatient, frustrated, and eventually quits. The other waters daily, trusts the soil, trusts the process, and in time reaps a harvest. Both had the same resources. The difference was vision. One saw only dirt, the other saw the future harvest. That's the difference between drifting and building. Vision allows you to see harvest while your hands are still full of soil. But vision is not passive. It demands responsibility. It asks you to align your actions daily, to ask yourself, does this move me closer to or further from my vision? Because vision without discipline is hallucination. Vision without daily alignment is fantasy. But vision with discipline is destiny. It's not about making perfect moves every day. It's about making consistent moves in the right direction. Over 10 years, those moves add up to a transformation so radical people will call it luck, but you will know it was vision. Remember, chaos is not the enemy. Chaos is neutral. It only becomes destructive if you lack direction. If you have vision, chaos becomes raw material, the fire in which resilience is forged, the test that strengthens commitment. Life will never be stable, but with vision, you don't need stability. You only need clarity. And clarity is enough to navigate through storms, through uncertainty, through the noise of the world, until you arrive exactly where you decided to go. That is the power of vision, as the compass that guides through chaos. Resilience is not a trait you are born with. It is something you build, brick by brick, through relentless execution, through showing up when it's inconvenient, through pushing forward when everything in you says stop, and through refusing to quit even when progress feels invisible, because resilience is less about toughness and more about consistency under pressure, less about how loud you are in good times, and more about how steady you remain when the storm refuses to pass. Most people think resilience is about enduring pain, about gritting teeth and holding on, but that's only the surface. True resilience is forged in the rhythm of disciplined execution, in the small decisions repeated daily that create a pattern strong enough to hold even when life tries to break it. Imagine building a rocket. The design looks elegant on paper, the calculations are correct, the simulations are promising, but reality is chaos, engines fail, structures crack, weather shifts, and everything that can go wrong eventually does. Yet the only reason a rocket ever reaches orbit is not perfection but resilience, the willingness to test, fail, adjust, and execute again and again, until finally the machine aligns with the laws of physics, and life operates the same way. Nothing works on the first attempt, nothing lasts without testing, and resilience is what keeps you executing long enough for the alignment to happen. Relentless execution is the opposite of sporadic effort. It's not about bursts of energy followed by long pauses. It's about sustained forward motion, even if small, because momentum compounds, and when you refuse to stop, even in micro steps, you eventually achieve results that seem impossible to those who only act when inspired. Inspiration is fleeting. It comes and goes, but execution is permanent. It doesn't ask if you feel like it. It doesn't wait for perfect conditions. It only requires that you show up and do the next step. And here's the truth. Most people fail not because they lack talent, but because they lack resilience. They stop after the third rejection. They give up after the first failed launch. They quit when the audience doesn't applaud immediately. But the difference between those who transform their reality and those who remain stuck is simply that the resilient keep executing when others stop. Resilience doesn't mean ignoring pain or pretending difficulty isn't real. It means reframing it. It means seeing each challenge as data, as feedback, as an adjustment point rather than a verdict. When you encounter failure and treat it as a final judgment, you collapse. But when you encounter failure and treat it as iteration, you grow stronger, you adapt, and you build endurance that cannot be faked. Relentless execution requires a mindset shift. You stop measuring progress by today's outcome, and you start measuring it by today's effort. Did I execute? Did I show up? Did I make progress, however small? If yes, then momentum is alive, and momentum is far more valuable than momentary victory, because momentum builds resilience, and resilience ensures victory in the long term. Think about the strongest companies, the most impactful inventions, the most transformative individuals. None of them succeeded because they never faced resistance. They succeeded because they kept executing through resistance until the resistance became irrelevant. The market doesn't reward ideas, it rewards execution, and resilient execution is what ensures ideas survive long enough to take root. Resilience is also contagious. When you keep moving through adversity, people around you begin to believe. They see that you cannot be broken, and they lend their energy to your mission. But if you collapse at the first sign of trouble, you lose not only your momentum but their trust. Leaders who endure, who keep building, who keep executing no matter what, create a gravitational pull that brings others into alignment. That's why resilience isn't just personal, it's cultural. It sets the tone for teams, for families, for movements, and it teaches others by example that chaos can be faced and overcome. But resilience is not blind stubbornness. It's not banging your head against the wall endlessly. It's intelligent persistence, the ability to adapt while refusing to quit, to adjust your methods while holding your direction, to learn while still executing. The resilient don't just keep doing the same thing, they keep doing something, learning, iterating, moving forward, and that flexibility is what makes them unstoppable. Relentless execution means you learn how to fall without breaking, how to fail without quitting, how to suffer without losing faith. And that's not glamorous, it's not celebrated on social media, but it's the very foundation of every lasting achievement. People look at the finished success and call it genius or luck, but behind it lies years of disciplined resilience, of quiet execution that nobody applauded, of showing up day after day, of refusing to die when the project seemed hopeless. And here's the paradox. The more resilient you become, the less dramatic your struggles appear, because what breaks others doesn't break you. What paralyzes others becomes a routine obstacle you move past. And people begin to mistake your resilience for ease, but you know it wasn't easy, it was built. Resilience doesn't happen overnight. It's trained, it's developed, it's built through small acts of discipline repeated until they become instinct. Until when failure hits you no longer panic, you analyze, you adjust, and you execute again without hesitation. That's resilience in action, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of unshakable continuation. To build resilience, stop chasing comfort. Comfort doesn't make you strong, resistance does. Seek environments that test you, that challenge your patience, that stretch your limits, because every time you endure and execute in those conditions, you expand your capacity. And capacity is what separates those who break from those who bend but never snap. Resilience is capacity. Relentless execution is the demonstration of that capacity over time. If you want to build anything significant, whether a company, a career, or a life of meaning, understand this. You will fail, you will be misunderstood, you will be rejected, you will doubt yourself. And in those moments, resilience is the only currency that keeps you in the game. Talent may open doors, luck may accelerate progress, but only resilience ensures you stay long enough for results to appear. Without resilience, every advantage eventually evaporates. With resilience, even disadvantage can be turned into advantage because you outlast those who quit. In the end, resilience is not about being unbreakable, it's about being unquittable. It's about relentless execution, doing the next thing, the next call, the next experiment, the next iteration, until the breakthrough finally comes. And when it does, everyone will call it sudden, but you will know it was inevitable, because resilience guarantees that the only variable is time. Relentless execution makes time your ally instead of your enemy, because as long as you keep moving, time compounds your effort, your learning, your growth, and eventually delivers results no one can ignore.